This is probably one of the most important talks for people in or not in Bitcoin to be listening to. One of the most important talks, I believe, in the entire industry at the moment.
I said Bitcoiners must mine. And I think when I say that, there's a common question that comes up for many of us is, what is a Bitcoiner? I'm going to give you my definition. And I don't think it's the definition that is commonly held, and that's okay. We don't all have to agree on it. There's lack of consensus on this one. But I see it as a person who voluntarily decides to save Bitcoin instead of fiat. And that is an important distinction, the voluntary I've highlighted there, because you have to choose it on your own, right? You have to go through the work necessary to get there. In the earlier years, it was much harder to get to the point of realizing, oh my gosh, if I save Bitcoin, it's less likely to erode and fritter away, the melting ice cube analogy, than if I save fiat, which is inflation is going to erode the power of that purchasing power of my savings over time. But we now have greater educational materials, and it's easier to make that leap, but you still need to voluntarily accept that Bitcoin is a better form of savings than fiat. And when you do, there's some shifts that happen. I'm going to talk about those in a moment, but I think it's important to talk about why we save, because cross-culturally, again, I've lived outside the US for a decade now, and I can say this from lived experience, the reasons why we save are almost universal. Across cultures, and these are for the big life events. So we think of emergencies as the first reason why we need to save, and I know that's number 5 on that list, but the reason why I have it number 5 is because I think it's the least important of the life experiences. That's like step 1 in the game of life, right? We need to have something set aside so if something unexpected comes up, we have the ability to cover it. But more importantly is the savings unlock specific biological events for us. So one is we raise our families and our kids need to have shelter. And so our savings as parents help us or our kids, maybe they go off and they rent for a little while and build their own savings to put shelter over their head. But you gotta have a shelter in this world. And so we save to be able to provide that for ourselves. We save so that we can help our children get educated, because that education helps them have the economic opportunity to save for their future. Marriages, right? So that's where the community comes together and recognizes two people are going to put themselves together to build a family for the future. And those are costly events that require savings. And then retirement, right? So if we're lucky, we've lived a great life, kids, grandkids, all of those things, and we're sailing off into the sunset, and we have some way to pay for our care and not be a burden on our kids, and that requires savings. So those are the reasons why we save. But there's some specific things that hard savings does psychologically, and I think these are super important to acknowledge. And I say hard savings, we talk about hard money, so I'm borrowing some language when I talk about hard savings. But we know, again, that ice cube isn't melting when we save in Bitcoin, right? The money printer, the US Federal Reserve, isn't debasing our savings. And as a result, we get a sense of safety and security, that we've got that optionality for our future and that our savings provides. And that optionality gives us hope. We're not stuck. And that's important that we have hope, because it keeps us forward looking and it extends our time horizon. So if you are thinking about savings and what you're going to do with savings, you're naturally thinking about the future. And if we think about the future, I'm convinced that aligns us with our higher selves. What do I mean by that? Almost everybody in this room that I know will readily acknowledge that we are more than our 5 senses. So whatever you want to call that aspect of ourselves, I see it as timeless. And the more that our time horizons extend out, the more we align with that timeless aspect of ourselves. And that's super important, because when we're aligned with our higher selves, we operate at our best. You can look back in human history and see that the times in which we thought with the longest time horizons were the times that we behaved the best as a civilization. It's a civilizing force. Okay, so that's all going to lead to freedom. That's all precursor to mining. Now, I wanted to establish what a Bitcoiner is, because that has actually changed. Well, that hasn't changed, but how we get Bitcoin has changed over time. And this is a bit of Bitcoin history that I think we need to know more of and spend time thinking about, because there's been a fork in the timeline of Bitcoin And it started somewhere around 2012. So from 2009 to 2012, if you were running the Bitcoin software, you were mining. There was no separation. The software helped you mine, and that's how most of the early Bitcoiners got their Bitcoin, is they were mining it. Somewhere around 2012, and I would argue, though I wasn't around for this part of Bitcoin's history, that it was about the time that Coinbase opened doors and gave us an easy way through a customer experience to buy Bitcoin, that we shifted from mining to acquire our Bitcoin to buying our Bitcoin. And when we made that shift, there were some unintended consequences. And those unintended consequences, I believe, are just now being played out in a way that's becoming really observable. So what are those? Well, first of all, when we separated and decided to go buy instead of mine our Bitcoin, we divided the community. And you can see this. We have users and devs on one side, and we have mining community. If you go to a mining conference, you'll find very few Bitcoiners there, just as you will find very few miners at a Bitcoin conference. And that is natural. It's sort of obvious in hindsight that that would happen, but if you separate mining as the main source of acquisition from how the masses are acquiring their Bitcoin, of course there's going to be a natural separation in those two communities. So the natural consequence of that is the user and dev community has a bit of mining amnesia, from my perspective. Just don't understand the complications and specifics of mining, and bring their priors to the table on what they think mining is without having that direct experience. So, you know, the classic Mike Tyson quote is, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. You know, I like that quote a lot for mining, because everybody likes mining on a spreadsheet, but then you go get out in the real world and you go move physical space around and deal with electricity, and boy, that's a lot different than a spreadsheet. So there's a bit of mining amnesia, and then that has led, in my opinion, to mining centralization problems. All these problems that we're quite worried about, and I'm going to touch on this in a minute, are downstream of the fact that we are acquiring the majority of our Bitcoin by buying it instead of mining it. So why? Why did this happen to us? So I would like to have a deeper conversation with Bitcoin historians to see exactly why, but I came up with a few reasons why I think this happened. One, convenience, right? It's just easier to buy than mine. I mean, let's be honest with ourselves, and we're human. We do like convenience, so it's normal that sometimes we don't take the hardest route in life. So out of convenience, we've gone to exchanges to buy. Two, I think there's a mining community failure. And I say that because most people, including when I was starting SaaS mining, I had a lot of people saying, why don't you just mine it for yourself? And I think that attitude of, I want to mine just for myself, while it's great to be self-interested, I think that there was a failure in the mining community for anybody to develop an accessible way for the masses to mine. And that's made it difficult to compete with exchange-based acquisition. Third, supply and demand. If you were in a hurry and you want to get a lot of Bitcoin, it's much easier to buy it than mine it, right? You're going to get Bitcoin over time when you mine, but if you want a big block, you kind of need to buy it. So there's a supply and demand issue there. And fourth, there is a misalignment of incentives between exchanges and mining, right? At their core, the exchanges make money they take a cut of the fiat to Bitcoin transaction. That's how they make their profits. That's how they drive their businesses. That is not in alignment with pushing your people to mine, right? So there is a disincentive from the exchange businesses to push people into mining, right? And I think that's a very subtle point. I'm not sure if it's even conscious, but there is a core misalignment there. So let's talk about the mining centralization problems, just to address the elephant in the room. And this is the area, now that I've given the context, on which we see a lot of our community focused, right? The major issue is, again, back to acquisition. The intention for most of the hash rate on the network, hash rate being the computational power that secures the decentralized ledger that we call Bitcoin, is there to acquire fiat, not Bitcoin. And it's using Bitcoin as a proxy to do so. Now, I say that with full faith and confidence because I know if you are a publicly traded Bitcoin mining company, you have a fiduciary responsibility to return dollars to your investors. By definition, you are there to mine Bitcoin, but ultimately return dollars to your investors. You have a legal obligation to that. And that's a good chunk, if not the majority of the hash rate on the network. And I can tell you from going to many Bitcoin mining conferences, the majority of people in that room are also there.
All right, guys, I know I've been on mute, but we are getting stuff done on the other screen. And I left Kent here playing because this is probably one of the most important talks for people in or not in Bitcoin to be listening to. Kent gave this talk at Bitcoin Alaska, and he talks about a lot of new concepts. I mean, you guys, he's gone through at this point almost half of the talk. It's about 30 minutes, but a lot of new concepts that I think open the eyes for a lot of people, not just on mining, but on how the industry has evolved and how it will evolve over time. And he talks a lot about the mining centralization problem. He talks about how Bitcoiners can actually start mining Bitcoin. And he lays it out just really, really nicely. So, super important talks. One of the most important talks, I believe, in the entire industry at the moment. And so, you guys are getting to watch it here. And on the other screen, I know that earlier in the stream, we are going over Perplexity, the Comet AI agentic browser by Perplexity, and the bid for Perplexity to take over Google Chrome. And I am going through a little test on the other screen. I don't have it up here because it's in my inbox right now, but I'm having it organize everything in the inbox. So I literally just told it to organize everything with labels, have it be easy to navigate, and just make it so I can easily find what I need to find at any time. And I've been going back and forth with it, but it's legitimately organizing everything in my inbox, which is something that I've never really done. My inbox is kind of a mess, but I'm really excited to see how this looks. So I can tell you guys about that afterwards, after the talk, and if it's finished by then. But in the meantime, feel free to keep listening to Kent. Kent is going off here on this BTC Alaska presentation. So, and if you've already seen it, this is a great opportunity to watch again. I've watched this presentation like 5 times at this point, and each time, you pick up a little new nugget of wisdom. So that's, if you've already seen it, which most of you probably haven't, but if you have, it's good to spend a little bit more time with the concepts. So I'm going to unpause this. I'm going to mute my mic. I'm going to keep working on this browser organization on my Gmail.